The city skyline gleamed like a promise of endless ambition, its glass towers catching the last light of evening. Inside one of those towers, behind locked doors and mirrored windows, a war was brewing, a war that had no need for armies or soldiers, only men and women whose weapons were secrets, strategies, and the ruthless hunger to dominate. It began quietly, as these things often do, with two men who were once friends. Adrian Cole and Marcus Vey had met as graduate students, both brilliant in their own right, both driven by the kind of relentless ambition that made their professors whisper about future greatness. For a time, they worked side by side, sketching out plans for software that could revolutionize the industry. Their partnership was meant to be a marriage of genius and grit. Adrian, the visionary dreamer who could see possibilities others missed, and Marcus, the pragmatic executor who could make those visions real. But the seed of rivalry was planted early. Adrian was charismatic, the kind of man who drew people in with a smile and a promise. Marcus was quieter, calculating, less interested in applause than in power. When they launched their first startup, it was Adrian's face in the magazines, Adrian's voice on the podiums, while Marcus worked in the shadows, ensuring the product never collapsed under its own brilliance. The imbalance festered. Marcus began to see not a partner, but a thief, a man who lived off his discipline and stole the light for himself. Their first company imploded after a bitter split. Adrian accused Marcus of sabotage. Marcus accused Adrian of betrayal. Each walked away with nothing but rage and the promise of revenge. They would never stand on the same side again. Years passed, but ambition does not fade. It only sharpens. Adrian built a new empire, sleek, daring, the darling of investors who believed his every word. His company, Ecliptech, became a symbol of disruption, swallowing smaller firms whole and pushing out bold innovations that seemed always just a step ahead of the market. Marcus, meanwhile, chose a colder path. He founded Veron Systems, a firm built not on flair but on precision. Where Adrian dazzled, Marcus calculated. His company was slower to rise, but its roots were deeper, steadier, less vulnerable to collapse. Still, no matter how far he climbed, he measured his success not in profits but in how close he came to eclipsing Adrian. Corporate rivalries are usually fought in boardrooms and stock charts, but theirs was a different breed. Marcus hired investigators to track Adrian's moves, prying into deals, peeling back layers of strategy. Adrian, not to be outdone, paid hackers to break into Marcus's systems, stealing prototypes, manipulating deadlines, leaking false information to investors. Each victory was answered by a counterstrike, each humiliation avenged with greater cruelty. The game escalated into something darker. Employees defected, bribed with offers too large to refuse. Confidential files surfaced mysteriously in the hands of journalists eager for scandal. Anonymous tips led to government audits, derailing projects and bleeding resources. Lawsuits piled up like sandbags in a flood, each side trying to bury the other beneath legal ruin. But it was Marcus who first crossed the line into crime that could not be dressed up as business. He paid a desperate engineer, a man drowning in debt, to plant malware inside Ecliptech's network. The code was elegant, invisible, designed not to destroy, but to watch. Every keystroke, every encrypted file siphoned quietly into Marcus's servers. With each passing day, Marcus held the pulse of Adrian's empire in his hands, waiting for the moment to strike. Adrian discovered the betrayal too late. Contracts were undercut before they were signed. Investors pulled out days before announcements. Competitors arrived at trade shows with eerily similar products, as if they had plucked the ideas straight from Adrian's mind. It was sabotage on a scale so intimate that Adrian could almost feel Marcus's hand on his shoulder, mocking him. And then came the breaking point. A prototype, Adrian's masterpiece, a technology that could redefine artificial intelligence, vanished from his labs. Within weeks, Veron Systems unveiled a suspiciously similar project. Adrian's fury turned cold and quiet. For all his charm, all his brilliance, Adrian had never been a man to accept humiliation. He hired someone. No lawyers, no auditors, no hackers. A man who never gave his name, whose reputation was whispered about in dark corners of the city. Adrian wanted the proof, the evidence that Marcus had stolen everything. He wanted to destroy him not just in business, but in life. What happened next remained shrouded in fragments of police reports and half-buried testimonies. One night, Marcus's head of research was found dead, his car driven off a bridge, with his steering tampered. Weeks later, the same desperate engineer who had planted the malware disappeared, his body never found. A fire broke out in one of Veyron's data centers, destroying years of research. The police called them accidents, coincidences, but Marcus knew better. He felt Adrian's hand in every shadow, every whisper of misfortune. Fear became paranoia. He doubled his security, lived behind walls of glass and steel, but paranoia feeds on itself. Sleep-deprived, jittery, Marcus began lashing out, making mistakes, alienating allies. His board grew restless. His empire began to crack. Adrian, meanwhile, sat in interviews smiling for the cameras, speaking of innovation and the bright future of technology. To the world, he was untouchable. To Marcus, he was a ghost in the dark, striking with ruthless precision. The war ended not with a lawsuit, nor a hostile takeover, but with a body in an office tower. Marcus Vey was found slumped over his desk late one night, a single bullet through his skull. The cameras had been cut. The gun was never found. Officially, it was ruled a suicide, the act of a man consumed by pressure and paranoia. But those who knew whispered otherwise, that Marcus had lost a war few ever saw, a war waged not with armies but with secrets, lies, and revenge. Adrian never spoke of it. He built his empire higher, taller, brighter, until his face once again gleamed from magazine covers, the portrait of success. Yet in the quiet moments, when the city lights flickered against the glass of his office, he sometimes saw Marcus's shadow staring back at him, a reminder that the cost of victory is never measured in dollars, but in blood. And so the tale of two rivals closed, not as a story of business, but as a brutal true crime, an empire built on betrayal, espionage, and the relentless hunger for revenge. The truth of their story did not die with Marcus Vey. The city, with its appetite for scandal, began to whisper in corridors and across bar tables. Journalists tried to pull at the threads, sensing a darkness hidden beneath the gleaming facade of corporate triumph. But every time they reached too close, sources clammed up, files vanished, and careers ended abruptly. It was as if someone powerful was watching from above, cutting the strings before they unraveled. Adrian thrived in the silence. Yet power has a way of drawing enemies, and though Marcus was gone, his shadow lingered in ways Adrian had not anticipated. Marcus had been meticulous, a man who believed in contingencies. He had kept encrypted files, logs of his espionage, records of meetings with the engineer, the bribes, even notes of his suspicions about Adrian's darker tactics. These files did not vanish with his death. They sat waiting in a hidden drive, programmed to release if Marcus failed to log in within a week. One morning, Adrian awoke to find his name once again splashed across headlines. Not as the visionary of Ecliptech, but as a man implicated in fraud, sabotage, and potentially murder. The files had been leaked anonymously to the press and federal investigators. They were incomplete, fragments of a larger story, but damning enough to cast a shadow over his shining empire. Adrian denied everything. He hired the best lawyers money could buy, spun narratives about Marcus's instability, painted himself as the victim of a dead man's paranoia. But whispers are difficult to kill. Investors grew cautious, partnerships faltered, and the glimmering tower of Ecliptech began to shake on its foundation. Behind closed doors, Adrian grew colder, harder. He knew Marcus, even in death, was not finished with him. Someone had released those files, and he intended to find them. Suspicion turned inward. He fired longtime employees, interrogated executives, and cut ties with allies. Paranoia crept in like a sickness, the same sickness that had destroyed Marcus. And then the killings began again. A journalist investigating the leaked files was found stabbed in an alley, her laptop missing. A mid-level programmer who had once defected to Marcus's company died in what police called a botched robbery. A federal investigator's home was burned to the ground. His body never recovered. The city began to murmur that Adrian's reach extended far beyond the boardroom. But Adrian was not untouchable. In one quiet corner of the story stood Marcus's younger sister, Evelyn Vey. Unlike her brother, she was not a builder of empires. She was a patient woman, an academic, who had watched from the sidelines as her brother destroyed himself in pursuit of vengeance. But when Marcus was found dead, she did not believe the story of suicide. She began her own investigation, quiet, careful, away from the spotlight. Evelyn was the one who had released the files. She had more still, videos, recordings, enough to bury Adrian forever. But she was not reckless. She knew Adrian's power, his ability to silence threats. So she played the long game, leaking pieces here and there, drawing him into the open. For Adrian, it was like chasing a ghost. Every time he struck, another piece surfaced. His empire was bleeding out slowly, not from a single blow, but from 1,000 tiny cuts. The public began to turn against him, the image of the golden entrepreneur tarnished by smoke and blood. And yet, Evelyn was not free of the darkness she had inherited. Vengeance had a way of consuming, just as it had consumed Marcus and Adrian. Her pursuit became an obsession, her life reduced to shadowed rooms, encrypted messages, and sleepless nights. In her mind, she was no longer an avenger. She was the executioner of justice, the one who would finish what Marcus had started. The cycle of revenge spun on, a wheel that seemed never to stop. Adrian hunted Evelyn. Evelyn hunted Adrian. Two shadows circling each other in a city that had long since forgotten where the feud had begun. And somewhere in the silence between them, the truth lingered. This was not just the tale of two rivals. It was the tale of ambition turned to poison, of genius twisted by betrayal, of men and women who built empires not for progress, but for the satisfaction of seeing an enemy brought low. The city kept moving, towers rising higher, lights burning brighter, as though trying to hide the blood that had been spilled to build them. But those who knew whispered still of Adrian Cole and Marcus Vey, their war, their crimes, their revenge. And they whispered, too, that the story was not over. Not yet.